Well, here we are in Jeremiah 45. Very short chapter. It's only 5 verses long. And trying to get to my page here. Very poignant, I think, especially if you are any kind of leader in the church. I think this should speak to you very clearly here. Come back to that. What this chapter is doing, it's kind of closing out that section of Jeremiah that reviewed the events before, during, and after the fall of Jerusalem and Judea. Remember, we were looking primarily from Jeremiah's perspective. Now we're looking at it from the perspective of Jeremiah's associate, his secretary, his spokesman, Baruch. We're going to finish this section, and next time we're going to look in a section that brings judgment on the nations around Israel. But let's close this out first. Verse 1 shows that the events here actually happened about 605. Now, if you recall from earlier videos, there were 3 exiles that happened to Judea at the hands of Babylon. One was in 605, one in 597, and the third in 586. This particular set of events happens in 605, way back in chapter 36, if we're trying to get a rough chronology of how these things work together. Remember how Jeremiah, as I've discussed, ranges things topically, not chronologically, and we see that here. My humble opinion on why he closes out this section with this particular chapter is that it's a reminder for us that we need to make sure that our expectations are aligned with God's holy plan, his sovereign plan. Sometimes God's people, as we've seen with Jeremiah and we see now with Baruch, are caught up in the maelstrom of judgment that falls on Israel, and in our cases, the church. That we suffer along with everyone else in the church when God's judgment falls upon it. We need to keep that in mind, that this is part of God's sovereign plan. In verses 2 and 3, we see God addressing Baruch. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, to you, Baruch, you said, woe is me, for the Lord has added sorrow to my pain. I am weary with groaning and find no rest. So Baruch then is got this burden. This burden comes from assisting Jeremiah. It's suffering under the hand of God as Jeremiah is. This is all weighing heavily on him. Baruch's probably wondering, what did he get himself into and why? He describes the situation as full of sorrow and pain and tiredness and groaning and restlessness. And these things are multiplying in his life. And these seem to me like private thoughts that God is hearing. Private thoughts that Jeremiah has had. So God intervenes here to not chasten him, but to comfort him. Verse 4, God's reply is essentially, look at it from my perspective, Baruch. I've torn down and uprooted everything I've built up and planted. In other words, I think God is trying to get Baruch to take a divine and an eternal perspective. Let's look at these verses here. It says, thus you shall say to him, thus says the Lord, behold what I have planted, I have built, I am breaking down. What I have planted, I am plucking up. That is the whole land. And do you seek great things for yourself? Seek them not. For behold, I bring disaster upon all flesh, declares the Lord. But I will give you your life as a prize of war in all the places which you may go. So again, he's trying to get Baruch to take an eternal perspective. And he's given him this guidance or this encouragement, this comfort that despite all that you're going to go through, Baruch, You are going to keep your life as a prize of war. It's as if it's taken out of the battle, snatched out of the flames of battle, and you're going to keep your own life. Well, very short here, but a good adjustment on a bad attitude in Baruch, and sometimes in us, as members of God's church. God will bring judgment against the church, and we all suffer because of it, the good and the bad, those deserving and those undeserving. I've been in churches and been parts of churches and been let out of churches because of God's judgment. And I have suffered, as I'm sure you have as well. But God has said He's got a sovereign plan and a sovereign decree. We see that as decree for Israel. Jeremiah and Baruch have a part in that plan. Sometimes the part that they play is difficult and painful and tiresome. But it was for them as it was for Jesus. And that's what we are called to endure when we have to suffer at the hands of others, which is part of God's plan to chasten His church. In the church age, Ephesians 2:10 says that each one of us has been chosen by God, regenerated, and saved for what it says there is good works. Those good works, brothers and sisters, are our part in His plan for the church. So even when judgment is falling on the church, even when chastening is coming, even when it brings tears to your eyes and it's sorrowful, we need to be all about doing the work that God has given us to do, just like Jeremiah and Baruch, just like the Lord Himself. It's going to be difficult. We need to prepare our minds according to 1 Peter 1:13. Prepare our minds for action. Have sober assessment of what we need to do. But ultimately, we need to press on. Even though it's difficult, it's going to be difficult just as it was difficult for the Lord. So hang in there. Take courage. Look at Jeremiah. Look at Baruch. Look at the Lord and press forward. God bless you, brothers and sisters. God bless you in your labor for the Lord.